Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for this webinar, the final online engagement session for our climate strategy and our natural environment plan consultations. My name is David Perrett, and I'm the Communications Business Partner here at Wiltshire Council. We're joined today by Councillor Nick Botterill, Cabinet Member for Climate Change, Tamara Ray, Portfolio Holder for Climate Change, Ariane Crampton and Vicky Burville from our Climate team, and Georgina Clampett-Dix and Paul Robertson from our Planning team. Before we start, I'm going to give you a quick introduction of how this webinar will work. If you wish to see closed captions of the speaker's words, then please click on the CC button on the bottom right of the screen, and then they should appear after 30 seconds or so. The system can sometimes take a while to get warmed up. If you're having any technical problems, please try switching it off and switching it on again, as this is the most common solution. So if you encounter problems, please close Teams or your browser, reopen it, and then click on the meeting link again that was sent through earlier. Other problems may be down to your home internet connection. If you're hearing an echo, it may be that you have this event open in 2 or more windows. You're welcome to submit a question to be answered using the chat function, and please use your name so we can make sure we are answering questions from as many different people as possible. The presentations will take up much of the session today, but as well as answering as many questions as we can this evening, we'll also provide written answers to any questions that we are not able to get to and add them to our website. You can find questions and answers from previous sessions on our website too, and we'll post a link in the chat. Many of you also submitted questions before the event, and we will aim to answer as many of those as we can today. You should be able to see slides on your screen, and over on the other side, you should be able to see the Q&A panel. For some of you, it may be beneath your screen, and you'll need to scroll down to see it. You may need to click on the icon of the 2 overlapping speech bubbles to open this panel. We will also use this panel to make any announcements. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published on YouTube, but only speakers will be shown on the video. I'll now hand you over to Councillor Nick Botterill, Cabinet Member for Climate Change.
Hi, thank you very much, David, for that. I'm going to briefly introduce the strategies and then hand over to officers who will talk you through them. And as it's been said, I'm the portfolio, I'm a Cabinet Member for Climate Change. And I always make the point that the fact that we have a Cabinet Member for Climate Change, and that's one councillor, one leader plus 8 other councillors. Plus we have what's called a portfolio holder in Councillor Tamara Ray. So that's 2 councillors who specifically cover climate change. I think that demonstrates the absolute importance which this issue is now accorded by Wiltshire Council. So we have 2 draft strategies which we're launching at the moment. We have the climate strategy and we have the green-blue infrastructure strategy. And these are, as the title states, strategies which will inform our approaches. And whilst we have listed important and immediate actions, what these 2 documents are not are in themselves our detailed delivery and implementation plans. Those will come on and will flow from these strategies in due course. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. By way of background, as many people will know, Wiltshire Council declared or acknowledged the climate emergency in 2019 and committed to becoming a carbon neutral council by 2030. And this commitment was reaffirmed by the new council administration, which was elected in May this year. We've been publicly reporting on progress every 6 months since 2019, and as many will be aware, the council has, as an entity itself, reduced its 2015 carbon footprint by 80%. Actually, I saw something today, it's 81% now. So that's actually 81% reduction in the council's carbon footprint since 2015. And I guess we can take some comfort from this. But it's only fair to say that the remaining 20% will, of course, represent a fairly harder proposition to eliminate. Wiltshire Council, important though many of us think it is, I suspect there might be some doubts on that one amongst the audience, but it's in itself a fairly small contributor to overall carbon emissions within the whole of the Wiltshire area. So what we're doing now is we're going beyond the achievement of carbon neutrality for Wiltshire Council. We're now in the business of how do we achieve the decarbonisation of the whole of Wiltshire. So it moves from one of direct actions, which we as a council can get involved in, to how do we use the convening powers, our democratic mandate, to influence the direction of travel for the whole area with regard to reducing carbon emissions. And you know, governments can make laws and pass or decree dates for achieving various milestones, but actually it will be in local areas like ours and the changes that are brought into play here in Wiltshire, informed by this strategy, which in a material way will convert all those intentions into reality. The strategy sets out 7 key theme areas for attention, and these are the areas where we need to make progress if we're to secure the transition to a zero carbon future, zero net carbon future. And we'll hear more about those in the following presentation. I would say that the climate strategy has been arrived at after a huge amount of validation work along the way, and far too many people and entities to thank individually. Safe to say, I think the Council's own Environment Select Committee and its Climate Task Group, as well as external parties such as the Wiltshire Climate Alliance, would be picked out as leading leading entities that have helped us get where we've got to. I think the notion of the climate strategy is actually pretty well understood, but actually the ideas and concept behind the green and blue infrastructure strategy is less so. Now let's have a look at the area that we're talking about. Wiltshire is actually quite a large county, 1,257 square miles. We've got large areas of parks, open spaces, woodlands, gardens. We have trees in areas and street trees, and these are all examples of the green infrastructure which provide environmental and wider benefits. The blue infrastructure will, by contrast, comprises the lakes, the ponds, canals, watercourses, etc. And so one way or another, a very large part of our area comprises green and blue infrastructure sites. So it includes the 6 main river catchment areas and much of what is forms part of the designated areas: Cotswolds, North Wessex Downs, Salisbury Plain, Cranbourne Chase, and New Forest areas. The Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy sets out the Council's vision for how we manage, protect and enhance biodiversity, ensure access for our residents to these green-blue assets as a well-being benefit, and work with the processes of nature to adapt to a changing climate. And so in reality, it is our plan for the natural environment. Georgina Clampett-Dix and Paul Robertson from the planning team will be speaking more on this later on. Climate change has considerable potential to inversely impact adversely on green and blue infrastructure. And I'd just like to urge you to consider the 2 strategies as complementary pieces, not individually, but actually see them as being complementary. So that's the background to the 2 strategies. And before I hand you over to Ariane Crampton and Vicky Burville from our climate team, who'll take you through the climate strategy, I just urge everybody who's listening to please complete the consultations. If you don't let us have your views, we won't know what you're thinking. So please, 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 if there's one message you take away from this tonight, please complete the consultations and let us have your views, whatever those views may be. So thanks for listening, and I hand you on.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everybody. My name is Ariane Crampton. I'm the head of climate programme, and I'm going to be taking you through, with Vicky Burville, my colleague, some key points from our climate strategy this evening. Next slide, please. So, as Nick mentioned, in February 2019, we acknowledged the climate emergency at Wiltshire, and we committed to seek to make Wiltshire carbon neutral by 2030. Then a few months later, we set ourselves a target as an organisation to become carbon neutral by 2030. And so we've developed a climate strategy which is really setting out the key areas that we can focus on over the next 5 years, and also give a bit of context on policy and emissions data. We did have a longer document that we published back in January, which was our discussion document for our climate strategy. And if you're interested in that, that's still available on our website. And this strategy doesn't repeat that discussion. Next slide, please. So we've kept our strategy deliberately high level and succinct because we want as many people as possible to read it and engage with it. It sets out our objectives and areas of focus, but it also remains flexible. And that's because we expect there to be quite a lot of changes, not only in technology, but also in the national policy and strategy context over the coming months and years, especially with COP26 just around the corner, which is the UN Climate Summit. We've built our strategy on the available evidence base, but we know that there are gaps in our understanding, so we know that there's more work to be done. And we are going to develop detailed delivery plans coming out of this strategy, and some of those are already being worked on now. So, for example, there's an electric vehicle infrastructure plan that's going to the next cabinet meeting, which will be published on our website next week. So that's the first of our delivery plans, and then there will be a suite of those developed. The strategy is not a statutory document. It's going to influence other key council strategies and plans, however. And it's really important to understand that actually, according to the UK CCC, the Climate Change Commission, local authorities can influence a third of emissions in their area. So what we really need is engagement and buy-in from others so that we can then start to shift the other 2/3 of emissions. So that's what our strategy focuses on, as well as getting our own house in order. Next slide, please. So this diagram sets out the council's levers of influence, and you can see at the top there we've got what's within our direct control. So we have our own buildings and street lights, for example. And then as we move through the onion, we've got less and less control. So within our indirect control, we have, for example, our supply chains. Then we have a regulatory role with planning and licensing. And then we can also lead by example. We can work through partnerships. And finally, we can enable and engage people by inspiring action and providing information. So we need to work on all those levels. Next slide, please. In terms of where Wiltshire's carbon footprint comes from, so for the whole county, you probably won't be surprised to see that transport is the biggest section of CO2. So transport, this is petrol and diesel vehicles, accounts for 45% of the county's carbon footprint. And then we've got 29% coming from industry, agricultural and commercial. And then we've got 26% coming from homes. So really our strategy looks at all those 3 segments and also some cross-cutting themes that we need to tackle. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Vicky now. She's going to talk through the 7 themes which Nick mentioned in his introduction. Thank you.
Yes, so in our strategy, thanks Ariane. So we have the 7 delivery themes. Transport, as you can see, is up there. It's our biggest area of emissions in the county. And I'm going to go through these different sections now just to give you a flavour of what's in the strategy. Next slide, please. So in each delivery theme, in each chapter, you'll find a similar format, and we have objectives which are identifying things that we know need to happen in Wiltshire, and this is based on research, strategies, international and national ones that we need to follow, but also evidence includes the engagement we've done with stakeholders throughout the development of the strategy. And We then sort of go into a bit more detail on our areas of focus. These are things that you can see the two different coloured panels below. Wiltshire Council can do some of them in their direct control, but there's also plenty that we'll need to work in partnership with others on, or use our influence in different ways. And within those areas of focus, we've marked some with an exclamation mark, and those are ones that need to start immediately. They're all urgent, but this is just highlighting sort of even more time sensitivity. And some of those we already have started doing. Next slide, please. So the first section is transport, and as you can imagine, it's a complex area. We're going to need to focus our efforts on finding a really good solution that is good for everyone in the county, as well as the economy and the environment. So it's not going to be a single measure that solves everything. We know from the National Transport Decarbonisation Strategy, the government are already saying that electric vehicles are not the only solution, but they are part of the solution, especially in our rural counties such as Wiltshire. We do need EVs or low carbon vehicles, but we also need really good public transport. That does include buses, which we focused on because that's has most of our areas of control, but we also do obviously need to link up with rail, and of course walking and cycling as well, and all of the solutions available to us. Next slide, please. So in our built environment section, this is homes and other buildings as well. So all our buildings need to be net zero carbon, and this is obviously our new homes represent a huge opportunity to do that, but we have a lot of existing buildings as well which will need to be retrofitted. It's a big challenge, and as well as making those buildings energy efficient, we need to be able to make sure they're adapted to climate change so that we are able to withstand the challenges of changed climate and perhaps more extreme weather, heating and cooling, flooding. And in the strategy, there's quite a helpful diagram to explain some of those ideas. Next slide, please. Our natural environment, food and farming section, that's obviously covers quite a large area. I won't go into too much detail about it because a lot of the aspects that are covered in a high level way in the climate strategy are covered in a bit more detail in the green and blue infrastructure strategy, which we'll hear about in a little while. But as you can imagine, it's about absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, both through tree planting and vegetation, but also through soils, and healthy soils are much better at doing that, and that's perhaps less well known. But it's also about nature-based solutions that help us adapt to climate change again as well. Next slide, please. The next section is energy production, but also energy efficiency. So yes, we need to look at renewables in the county and decarbonising our heat and electricity, moving away from fossil fuels. But we also need to work on reducing the energy use in the first place, and that will enable us to be able to depend on the renewables. And there'll be enough to go round, essentially. Next slide, please. The green economy section is, again, quite a varied section because it covers our skills and capacity, but the green economy is about increasing the businesses and industry in the green sectors, such as the renewables, also smart technology and energy advice, for example. And it's building up the skills and capacity and in our county to be able to deliver those and match it up. But it's also about helping businesses to take action to become more carbon neutral and climate resilient. Actually, there's a lot going on in that area already, and we can learn from businesses and share learning You can see from the graph that it shows the current jobs in the green sector at the moment, and then what they're projected to be in 2030 and then 2050. Separately, there's just an illustration of a survey that's been done showing that 50% of young people who responded wanted a job in the green economy, and it just shows the awareness of that amongst young people. Next slide, please. Waste is our section. Obviously, we have waste management. The council collects household waste, but we also have, the commercial sector in the county as well, and we need to all work towards zero avoidable waste and a circular economy, which means not just using things and throwing them away, but it means we keep value in the system as long as possible, make the most of our resources, and make sure we're getting the most out of that. And we also need to have our waste management processes decarbonised and make sure that's being done the best way possible. Next slide, please. Finally, we move on to our own operations as a council, and the graph there shows our decrease in emissions since 2015, and these are our scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is our direct emissions that we have control over. The little bit that's green in the middle there is attributed to our green energy tariff, which we switched to recently. But we know we need to still work on reducing energy. That's not the only part of it, and the carbon hierarchy or the greenhouse gas hierarchy shows that in the strategy. The orange dotted line shows what we've got left to do, and as Nick said earlier, it could be the hardest part. So we'll be looking to show leadership by working on our own emissions, but also work with others in the county to share learning and provide leadership. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand back to Ariane just to finish off now. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. So in terms of the next steps and taking the strategy forward, we're going to be having to work in partnership, as you understood from that spheres of influence diagram I described at the start. So we need to work with residents, businesses, other public sector organisations, and really the whole community of Wiltshire to take the strategy forward. We'll be producing 6 monthly progress updates to Cabinet and Council, as we have done to date. So we've done 4 to date, and we will continue to do those. And we will continue to work with the Global Warming and Climate Emergency Task Group, which is made up of a selection of councillors, a cross-party group, which is working on this issue and scrutinising the progress. We're also going to be setting up a new Climate and Environment Forum at some point next year. So the plan is to have the final climate strategy ready by early 2022 so that it can be adopted by the full council meeting in February. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Georgina Clampett-Dix and Paul Robertson, and they're going to talk about our green and blue infrastructure strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariane. I think that's given a really good flavour for what we're going to be talking about here. My name's Georgina Clampett-Dix. I'm the Head of Spatial Planning, and I'm standing in for my colleague Lynn Trigwell today, who unfortunately cannot be with us. I'll be joined partway through the presentation by Paul Robertson, who works with Lynn and our landscape and design team, and both Lynn and Paul are leading on the development of the green and blue infrastructure strategy for Wiltshire. So next slide, please. So I'm quickly going to take you through our green and blue infrastructure strategy to give you a flavour of the document. As Nick has already said, our natural environment is important to us for many reasons, including the health and well-being benefits of accessing green space, and ensuring the protection and enhancement of our natural environment is also an important part of our response to climate change. So, as has already been mentioned, the strategy itself is complementary to the climate strategy. It focuses on the issues around climate change, how they affect our natural environment, and what we can do to support it. It's already been set out that climate change is having a massive effect on the environment, but I think the reverse is also true, The natural environment itself can help us adapt to climate change, and we need to recognise both those factors. The fact that we are changing our natural environment is affecting, for example, our ability to absorb the carbon that we are emitting, and so it's important that we do consider both factors hand in hand. In the strategy, we look at how we can use the natural environment to give us some nature-based solutions to help capture carbon storage. And it's also important that we support our natural environment to be able to adapt as well as mitigate against changes and the effects of climate change. So increased summer temperatures and drought, and maybe, of course, those wetter winters that we're now starting to experience. We will come on to this a little bit more as we go through the presentation. But simply put, the strategy sets out a framework. It includes a vision, goals and principles for protecting and enhancing a natural environment. It considers what is needed, how it can be delivered, and provides the framework around which the detail can be built, in particular as new legislation starts to emerge, and in particular the eagerly awaited Environment Bill. It will therefore be supported by a series of documents or implementation plans that will follow behind it. And these will be taken through the National Environment and Climate Task Group that Ariane has also just referred to. So next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly take you through, with the support of Paul, sections within the strategy, just to provide a flavour of the document and the content. So the strategy itself is divided into 5 distinct areas. I think it's a relatively light read. It's designed to allow you to dip in and dip out. So hopefully by taking you through this, it will enable you, when you come to look at it on your own, to understand it a little bit more. It is, as we've already said, a strategic document. It will help manage the direction of travel to help ensure that all efforts by not only ourselves, the Council, but also our partners, and as well as the wider community, can pull together to deliver an agreed vision. It's absolutely fundamental, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, that we do address some of the changes that have been happening. Some of these might feel small individually, but small changes to our natural environment that have been happening over years collectively can have quite a dramatic effect. And I think the first statistic of 97% wildflower meadows being lost in the UK since the 1930s is quite alarming and does show how much change has actually been happening. So next slide, please. So turning to section 1 of the plan, this is about setting the scene. This will give the background about what the strategy is and how we developed it. It also explains what green and blue infrastructure is and why it is important. Next slide. So there are various definitions for green and blue infrastructure. This one, though, which is provided in our strategy, is taken from the government's planning practice guidance on the natural environment, and we believe it gives a very good definition. Essentially, it is about having an infrastructure or network of green spaces and corridors, private or public, such as park, woodlands and hedgerows, and blue or wet spaces such as canals, rivers and ponds, that provide multiple benefits for communities and biodiversity, and ensuring that these remain strong and connected. It's about what we call ecosystem services, and this means those natural resources that we rely on. So the quality of our water, the insects that pollinate our plants and crops, the soils that we need to grow those crops, etc. They are all interrelated. They all offer services to us and are fundamental to our healthy living going forward. So next slide, please. So section 2 is very much about shaping the vision. This sets out the policy context and looks at the local context also for Wiltshire. It covers in more detail how we went about defining Wiltshire's green and blue infrastructure network. So next slide, please. So what this slide illustrates is that there are many policy documents, strategies and guidance and legislation that are already out there. And the diagram on the left-hand side sets out some of the key ones that the strategy links with, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that it relates to. And these, of course, include the government's 25-year environment plan, the Environment Bill, as I've mentioned, which includes new requirements such as local nature recovery strategies and biodiversity net gain. And there are already various DEFRA land management schemes that are all starting to look and support farmers to manage their land differently. So next slide. So the strategy is evidence-based. it does focus on the green and blue infrastructure that is already there. So it covers things such as biodiversity sites, habitats and woodlands, our natural corridors such as rivers, but also our man-made corridors such as the canals, as well as our strategic landscape areas, including the areas of outstanding natural beauty, and of course the New Forest National Park, which comes into Wiltshire. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Paul Robinson. So next slide, please. And he's going to take you through the last few sections. Over to you, Paul.
That's great. Thanks very much, Georgina, and good evening, everybody. So we set out how we shape the vision, and in this next section, our shared vision, this is where we actually set out the vision itself for the green and blue infrastructure strategy for Wiltshire. Next slide, please. So the vision is that we, as a council, see Wiltshire's multifunctional network of high quality, biodiverse and accessible green and blue infrastructure that is widely valued by our communities, businesses and visitors. And as a result of working with natural processes to support delivery of a multifunctional ecosystem services, that was the thing that Georgina was mentioning earlier on, and you can find out more in the strategy itself. And Wiltshire is better able to adapt to a changing climate and support the resilience of our regional biodiversity. And also those networks of green and blue spaces and corridors in the countryside and our towns support access and nature to healthy lifestyles. And I think we can see through how the pandemic just how important that our green spaces have become to our communities across Wiltshire. Next slide, please. So as well as having that overall vision, we've also set 3 main goals for our GBI strategy. The first goal is all around adaptation and resilience to climate change. That links quite heavily into the climate strategy, which Vicky was talking about earlier. Then we also have the halting the loss of and improving biodiversity. So that figure of 97% of grassland, wildflower grassland disappearing, which Georgina was talking about earlier. So we're keen to stop that and reverse that. And that's what one of the goals of the strategy is about. And finally, contributing to the health and well-being of the communities and visitors and those who work in Wiltshire as well. So that's again about getting people out and about and interacting with nature. Next slide, please. So we have priorities for action. These are the things that we are very keen to see undertaken. So creating more and better spaces, green spaces in our towns, planting the right trees in the right places, supporting walking and cycling. Again, that links in with the climate strategy. Encouraging environmentally sensitive farming and supporting a green economic recovery. Next slide, please. Right, so moving on from the vision section. Section 4 is all about how do you deliver that vision. Next slide, please. And firstly, we have delivery themes, and we have 6 delivery themes here, which cover a range of different themes. Some of the most important: flooding and water management, which again links into the climate strategy. Woodlands and trees, with having targets coming out nationally from national government, which we will need to meet our own internal targets across the county, as well as things like nature recovery and sustainable farming and land management. Next slide, please. Then we have delivery principles, and again with the GBI strategy, just the same as the climate strategy, partnership working, absolutely key for us. An integrated approach. We want to make sure we're bringing all the various strands together to make an integrated approach to our GBI work. We want to make sure it's evidence-led. So we're making sure that we're doing the right thing and following the evidence. Nature-based solutions. We really want to make sure that we're using nature and working with nature in wherever we can. Next slide, please. And then finally, section 5, the way forward. And again, as well as the partnership working, a really key bit of what the GBI strategy is all about is empowering communities to ensure that they can actually feel empowered to take on the role and responsibility of looking after green and blue infrastructure in their areas. And with that, I think I'm handing back to Georgina.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, just to summarise then, that's been a relatively quick overview of the document, so hopefully that will help you understand it and how it has been developed. As we've said, it will be supported by additional documents that will be developed in due course. We already have something called a community environmental toolkit, which is on our website, so please do go and have a look at that. It will give some ideas about what can be done at a local community level to help support the delivery of initiatives and ideas, so everyone can play their parts. The additional documents will help us to identify where investment in our natural environment will have the greatest benefit, and as everybody has said today, this is partnership working at its best. We do need to work together to protect our natural environment and enhance it for the benefit of both people and nature, so please do engage with the consultation. So can I have the next slide, please? So finally, just on that slide, those are the contact details of my colleague Lynn and Paul, so please do get in touch if you have any questions or need any support in response to the consultation. I would like to now move on to Tamara Ray, our portfolio for climate change. Tamara.
Thank you, Georgina, Paul, Ariane and Vicky for those informative presentations, and I hope it's given everyone a greater understanding of the two strategies and what we're trying to achieve. The consultations have been open for a month now and closes on the 17th of October, Sunday the 17th of October. So if you haven't yet completed the surveys and to let us know your views, please do so. You'll find all the information you need, including the strategies themselves, on our website. We've posted the links in the chat. We are all committed to combating climate change in Wiltshire, but it's something that we can't do alone. We need your support. So please tell your friends, neighbours and colleagues about the draft strategies and the ongoing consultation, and ask them to complete the surveys to let us know their views. I'll now hand you back to David for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. I can see lots of your questions coming in, so thank you for those. We'll answer as many as we can, but if we don't get the opportunity to answer your questions today, we will also collate all the questions raised and post written responses on our website. And as I said earlier, all the questions and answers from the previous sessions are already on our website. So moving over to the questions, the first one is for Nick. So the question is, strategies read as if they are subservient to the need for economic growth. Has Wiltshire Council discussed how it can change the emphasis to put solving the climate crisis ahead of driving economic growth?
Look, you know, this is about practicality. I don't believe you can separate the two. I think it's actually unrealistic to think that you can make any meaningful progress on carbon reduction unless we maintain a sound economy. This is going to cost an awful lot of money, more than I think anyone can envisage, and plus it's going to require people to radically change their habits and lifestyles. I think the only platform from which this can ever be attained is a sound economic one. We need a strong economy, we need a strong society, and we need a strong environment. We need all three, and they're all interdependent, and they need to be pursued in mutually supportive ways. So the answer is, I think we need, you can't do one without the other.
Thank you, Nick. The next question is for Tamara. How does supporting fair trade producers fit into the strategies?
Thanks, David. This is something that will need to be looked at as part of our delivery plans and through our procurement. Page 32 of the climate strategy highlights for immediate action that we will work with the supply community to help achieve economic, environmental and social benefits for the public good and the people of Wiltshire when we buy our goods and services.
Thank you very much. So the next question is for Nick. How are landscape character and landscape management accommodated in these strategies?
Well, that's something that a lot of people, a lot of residents are very concerned about. I think it's something like 40% of Wiltshire is covered by some form of landscape designation, be that areas of outstanding natural beauty, AONBs, national parks, or indeed World Heritage Sites. We recognise the importance of management plans for these designated landscapes, and we're going to ensure any strategies and of course the future delivery plans fully integrate with the aims of specific landscape management plans that affect the county. We've been receiving, or rather we've been reviewing, I'd say, probably better description, the landscape character assessments for Wiltshire, the number of them that make up all those areas, and we have a draft landscape strategy that we're going to be consulting on next year. So this is all to the fore, and it's very important that we get it right.
Thank you very much, Nick. This next one's for Tamara, and this is one we've had come up a few times, and it's come up this evening as well. So it's, when is the council going to collect food waste?
Thanks, David. That's a really interesting question. So through our household waste management strategy, we are committed to supporting residents in minimising the waste they produce. And we continue to subsidise the cost of food waste digesters that are capable of composting a typical household garden and food waste, while also producing a high quality compost for the garden. We know that other councils successfully collect food waste from the curbside, but in Wiltshire and other large shire councils, food waste collection costs are a significant barrier to the introduction of weekly food waste collections. We currently divert 110,000 tonnes of residual waste from landfill each year, with 50,000 tonnes annually sent to an energy from waste facility and 60,000 tonnes managed through a mechanical biological treatment facility in the county. Therefore, a significant proportion of food waste present in the residual waste we collect at the curbside is used as a fuel rather than going to landfill. And clearly, the picture is actually quite complex too, because it's not just our household food waste where we can as individuals take steps, but there is obviously the food that's used in cafes and businesses, and also in the food that doesn't make it through the supply chain, so is not processed by farmers, etc., or is actually waste in our supermarkets. So this is a very, very complex area. There isn't any specific legislation that requires local authorities to provide a separate collection for food waste. The government is currently consulting on policy that would mandate consistency in household and business recycling collections in England. This is also expected to include the introduction of weekly food waste collections with a target date for implementing into UK legislation from 2023. These proposals and others contained within the Environment Bill are subject to further consultation, so we are continuing to engage in this process and are monitoring developments very closely.
Thank you very much for that answer, Tamara. So the next one is for Nick. It's two questions in one, really. So what is the scope for county farms to demonstrate and promote regenerative agriculture? And how will you support farmers to fight climate change and increase biodiversity if current practices have the opposite effect?
Two questions. I suppose they're related. Yes. Well, if you look at the climate change strategy, it does make it clear that we're going to work with farmers and farming networks to see where we can support farmers and agribusinesses to reduce emissions and improve the ecosystems to capture carbon dioxide, so peat bogs, things like that come to mind. So we're going to look forward to working with farmers and developing ways to progress the strategy's objectives. That's the first point I guess I'd want to make. And I guess probably the most obvious way, which most people don't know this, but actually we have the council has a number of farms which it owns, which are tenanted. I think it's something like up to almost 5,000 acres of land is covered by these farms. We're obviously very, conscious that there's a lot of pressures on farmers at the moment. New payment schemes coming in, new guidelines being introduced, but we want to try and align with the farming industry and add value to what farming networks and businesses are already doing with respect to climate change. So we want to, the NFU, for instance, is aiming for farming as a whole to be carbon neutral by 2040. So we want to work with the farming industry to help achieve that, and we're going to identify where the council is best placed to act. That will involve using some DEFRA initiatives and also environmental land management schemes. We're also working with some big landowners as well as the county farms to look at ways how we can achieve and improve the biodiversity, and these will include things like nutrient management schemes and biodiversity enhancements. So I hope to be able to put more information out about those things in the near future, very near future actually. So I think that's a sort of a range of things that we're doing at the moment with the farming industry, and as I say, some we have direct influence over because we are a landowner and own farms as a council. Others we're going to have to work with the landowners.
Thank you very much, Nick. Next question for Tamara. What are the council's plans for renewable energy?
So we have plans to both increase our own renewable energy generation and also to facilitate renewable energy generation across Wiltshire. We are already using our estate to generate energy, and we have recently accessed £4.6 million of government funding to decarbonise heating and install solar panels on 19 of our buildings. Some of these are already installed, while others will be installed in the coming months. We're now looking at what we can do for other buildings and sites across the Wiltshire Council. The council looked at renewable potential in the county for the last local plan and intends to commission an updated study to look at renewable energy for the current local plan review. Grid energy is also becoming increasingly powered by renewables, and this is set to continue.
Thank you very much. Next one for Nick about the local plan. So it's how and when will both strategies influence spatial planning policy and the local plan review?
Well, you would ask me about the local plan review, wouldn't you? I suppose it's only right. Yeah, well, if you look at page 4 on the climate strategy, that sets out a framework for reducing emissions over the next 5 years. So that's the time scale that this strategy is expected to be, and for making the county resilient to climate impacts as part of that. The strategy is not a statutory document, but it's going to inform how we link with other council strategies, such as the business plan, which is the comprehensive plan for how the council is going to be run over the next few years, and the emerging local plan review, the local plan review will be completed and the new local plan will be in place by 2023, which is our timescale that's been mandated by government, and that of course is a big opportunity to do all sorts of things. I'll come on to that in a minute. I should also mention the local transport plan, which is also in the process of being put together. So the climate change strategy will inform all these other strategies, and they'll all mesh together. The green-blue infrastructure strategy sets out the framework for how we're going to improve the natural environment for people and nature, and the settlement frameworks provide a more detailed look for how the main towns and cities in Wiltshire are going to be managed. And while they're still in draft, those settlement frameworks, they are already being considered as part of the local plan review. So again, they're meshing together, and they form part of the consultation on the local plan review, which was conducted in January this year. I suppose I want to touch on new planning policies. I mean, they will all need to relate to the natural environment and the goals of the green-blue infrastructure strategy as well as the key objectives in the settlement frameworks. So you've got a whole series of interlinked plans, which will be, they're all on slightly different timetables, but they will all, coexist together and support each other. And that will inform us over the next, well, local plan review is 10 years for a 10-year period, but most of these will be sort of 4 to 5 years.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Tamara. So what is the timetable for all the other strategies, such as transport, countryside access, open space, landscape and trees, that the climate change and green and blue infrastructure strategies depend on?
Thanks, David. So we have already started work on some of the delivery plans, and they will be published as soon as they are ready. The electric vehicle infrastructure plan is the first and will be considered by Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time. Each strategy has a specific timeline that it is working to, but many of the documents mentioned are expected to be rolled out over the next 18 to 24 months, following consultation and community engagement. It was really important that both the climate and the green and blue infrastructure strategies were in place in advance, so that the goals, delivery themes and priorities could guide other emerging strategies, such as the local plan review and the local transport plan.
Thank you very much. Nick, the next question is for you. So is this a strategy to make Wiltshire carbon neutral, or the County of Wiltshire carbon neutral?
I suspect somebody wrote that before probably listening to the presentation, since obviously we went through that. But just to reiterate, the climate strategy covers both. As we said, we're firmly committed to becoming carbon neutral as an organisation by 2030. And we're also going to seek to make the whole of Wiltshire carbon neutral by that date, as recognised by the National Committee on Climate Change. And I think Ariane referred to this in her presentation. Local authorities can influence, I think it's approximately 1/3 of total emissions in their area. So, pretty substantial, really. But we will still need to work on how we're going to tackle the other remaining 2/3. But we have ourselves, and we have a pretty big influence on 1/3, and we have to have the strategy to engage with the remaining 2/3 as well.
Thank you very much, Nick. And another one for you is many public electric car chargers in council-owned car parks are broken. When will these units be repaired or replaced, and why has there been no urgency so far to carry out the work?
I was hoping nobody had asked that one. Yeah, well, look, I think it's not. We're not very happy with the situation with electric charging. I'll be quite frank over that. It's operated by the current infrastructure is operated by a commercial provider, and quite a few of the units are not working, and we can't get spare parts for them, and nobody makes the spare parts anymore, and there's all sorts of problems. Anyway, so the infrastructure is basically in need of replacement, and of course the commercial provider is not going to do that unless they've got a new contract or long-term agreement with us. And the work to put in new units and things will obviously incur significant cost, and of course that means we have to incur our normal procurement procedures and the bureaucracy that goes with all those things. But as some people who were listening carefully might have heard earlier, Ariane did say that the electric vehicle charging and infrastructure plan is going to be considered by the Council Cabinet on the 12th of October. So this question is very timely, and that will be a full plan for how we go forward with electric charging, and that paper will be published, I think, sometime on the website in early next week, whatever the time scale for making Cabinet papers public. I think it's early next week. And it'll cover residential charging and destination and workplace charging. So we're looking to move towards another stick county-wide solution on electric vehicle charging. But yeah, I apologise that what we have at the moment is not great. Although in many ways we were a trailblazer when some of it was put in. But the current situation is not great.
Thank you very much, Nick. So it's just a few minutes left of the event remaining. So I'm just going to ask the last question of Tamara, and then we'll move to the summing up. So Tamara, as the council is cutting road verges less frequently, how are the cuttings to be removed once the longer vegetation is cut? If they are not removed, the verges will become more enriched and less biodiverse. I think you have some machines that cut and remove. Will these become the norm across Wiltshire?
It's not quite right that we're cutting rural verges less. We are cutting a similar amount as previously, but we have changed the timing of our mowing. We now start to cut visibility areas for the safety of road users in May, and these continue through June. The remainder of the network then receives a single swathe cut through September and October. While cut and collect is a mowing process that does encourage wildflowers, there are limitations on the locations where it can be deployed. Currently, we use a rear-mounted collector flail, so any verge needs to be both wide enough and level enough for a tractor to drive along it. In addition to this, we are not hauling our cuttings from the site. Instead, we heap them within the verge to compost down. To remove them completely would come at an increased cost, both in terms of finance and carbon. We currently use cut and collect along the A350 from Shaftesbury, as these verges lend themselves to this treatment. In November, we will be reviewing our verge cutting for next year.
Thank you very much for that. And that concludes the questions this evening. But as I've said previously, any questions that we haven't answered will be published on our website, and questions from all previous events and their answers, of course, are also published on our website. So I'll now hand you back to Nick for closing remarks.
Well, I think we're pretty much up to time, so I will be very brief and just say thank you very much for attending. We've had a good attendance again on this, our second webinar, and all our presentations have been seem to have been well attended, whatever format they've taken. So thank you again. Please, as I said earlier, complete the questionnaires and the consultation feedback for both strategies. Don't just do one, do both, please. Good night.